I took a job monitoring a cave. It wasn't a cave, by silent screams. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The email that ruined my life and then offered to save it arrived on a Tuesday in late August. I remember the condensation beating on my glass of cheap whiskey, the oppressive humidity of a city apartment that had long since become my cage. My career, once a promising trajectory in geology, had flatlined spectacularly after let's call it a disagreement with my university's tenure board over falsified data. It wasn't my data, but my name was on the paper, and that was enough. I was radioactive, so when the offer from a company I'd never heard of, Art Doe's geo-exploration landed in my inbox, my desperation outweighed my skepticism. The subject line was simply, high-latitude research contract. The pay they were offering was obscene, enough to clear my debts and disappear for a decade. The job description, however, was a masterpiece of corporate vagueness. Seismic and atmospheric monitoring of a unique geological formation. The location, a remote outpost in the Svalbard archipelago. The contract length, 6 months, through the entirety of the polar night. Total, absolute isolation. 1 weekly text-only satellite check-in, any sane person would have deleted it. A ghost company, a suspiciously high salary, a job that essentially amounted to being the highest-paid hermit on Earth. But sanity is a luxury, and I was fresh out. I signed the digital contract before the ice in my whiskey had fully melted 2 weeks later. I was on a rattling cargo plane. It's the last leg of a journey that had taken me from the stifling heat of the city to the crisp, sterile cold of the Arctic. The man from Arctos who met me in Longyearbyen was as nondescript as the company's name. He had a weathered face, pale eyes, and a silence that seemed less about quiet contemplation and more about a profound lack of anything to say. He handed me a stack of manuals, a satellite phone programmed with a single contact, and a heavy-duty parka. The outpost is fully automated for heat and power, he said, his voice raspy. Your predecessor, Dr. Albrecht, left things in good order. Just keep the sensors running. That's the job. Lower the drones, collect the data, upload it. Simple. He didn't mention why Dr. Albrecht had left a 6-figure contract mid-term. I didn't ask. The final helicopter ride was the true baptism into this new world. We flew over a landscape of impossible alien beauty. Jagged peaks of black rock clawed their way out of immense, pristine glaciers. The world was a stark monochrome of white, gray, and black. A place that didn't just tolerate emptiness, but seemed to actively cultivate it. The outpost was a tiny, prefabricated scar on this perfect desolation. Single, squat, hexagonal building. Of reinforced steel, bolted directly to the permafrost. And beside it, the reason for its existence. The cave, the locals. The pilot had grunted over the roar of the rotors, had a name for it. Svalbard. The maw. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a wound. It's a perfectly circular, impossibly black void in the endless white of the glacier. At least 100 meters across. It didn't descend at an angle, plunged straight down into the planet's gullet. The air around its lip was noticeably colder, and a faint, almost imperceptible current of air seemed to be exhaled from its depths. Carrying a scent, I couldn't place something ancient like dust from a sealed tomb and the faint metallic temps of ozone. My new home was efficient. A small living space, a lab crammed with monitors, and a winch room that overlooked the maw. A thick, armored glass window allowed for observation. The heart of the operation was the winch, a colossal drum of carbon fiber cable that led to a platform on the cave's edge. From there, I was to deploy the sensor drones. The first few weeks were a study in monotony. I fell into a rhythm. Wake, eat, run, diagnostics, lower a drone, monitor its descent, retrieve it, upload the data. The drones were state-of-the-art, equipped for seismic, atmospheric, and magnetic resonance imaging. They were my only companions, my metallic children. Descending into the dark, the data they sent back was boring. Standard geological strata, ice core readings, consistent with the region, faint tectonic background noise. The maw was deep. Incredibly so. After a month of gradually extending the cable, I had lowered a drone over 3 kilometers down and still hadn't hit a bottom or even a sidewall. It was a geological anomaly, a perfect vertical shaft piercing the Earth's crust. I noted it in my logs, but Arctos seemed uninterested in my geological observations. Their replies to my weekly check-ins were always the same. Is the data stream consistent? It was early October when the sun vanished. It didn't just set, it was a slow, theatrical farewell. One day it skimmed the horizon, painting the snow in hues of apricot and lavender, and the next, it was gone, surrendering the world to the encroaching polar night. The darkness that followed was a physical presence. It was a thick, velvety blackness that swallowed light and sound. The stars were brilliant, cold diamonds, and the aurora. When it appeared was a silent, ghostly ballet of green and purple fire in the sky. But it was a beauty that held no warmth. It was the beauty of a perfectly crafted blade, and it was in this profound, unending darkness that I first heard it. It wasn't with my ears, not at first. It was a feeling. A low-frequency vibration that resonated through the soles of my boots, up my spine and into the base of my skull. I was in the lab analyzing the data from Drone 3's latest descent when I saw it on the seismograph. Perfectly rhythmic, incredibly faint pulse. It was a subaudible hum, a tremor so low on the frequency spectrum, it was more of a pressure wave than a sound. My first thought was equipment malfunction. I spent 2 days running diagnostics on every sensor, every cable, every processor. Everything was perfect. I sent a query to Arctos describing the anomaly. Their reply was uncharacteristically swift. This is within expected parameters. Continue monitoring. Expected?
Ow.
Could a perfectly rhythmic, repeating seismic pulse be expected? It wasn't tectonic. It wasn't volcanic. It was organized. The pulse repeated every 27 minutes. Slow, steady, subaudible beat. Thump, thump, like the world's slowest heart. Asterisk the murmur, as I began to call it, became the soundtrack to my existence. It was a constant, subliminal presence. I would wake in the sterile silence of my bunk and feel it in my bones. I'd be eating my freeze-dried rations and the water in my cup would tremble with a microscopic rhythmic beat. The outpost bolted. To the rock had become a giant resonator, and I was the tuning fork. Sleep became difficult. The murmur seemed louder in the silence of the night, a physical force pressing in on me from below. I started having strange dreams. Not nightmares, not yet, but unsettling visions of immense geometric shapes grinding against each other in the darkness. I dreamt of continent-sized gears meshing, of crystalline structures, miles long, vibrating with a slow, resonant energy. I would wake up with the phantom feeling of the vibration still humming in my teeth by mid-November. The psychological effects of the isolation, the darkness, and the incessant murmur began to compound. I started hearing things that began as what I thought was feedback in my headphones, a faint, stacky whisper buried beneath the seismic data feed. I'd rip the headphones off, and there would be nothing but the hum of the station's life support and the deep, resonant pulse from below. But when I put them back on, I'd hear it again. A sibilant hiss, a collection of soft, trailing sounds that almost formed words, but never quite did. They seemed to ride the same frequency as the murmur, as if the pulse from the deep was a carrier wave for this ghostly transmission. I was losing my mind. I knew it. This is what absolute solitude does to a person. The brain, starved of stimulus, begins to create its own. I tried to rationalize it, to document it as a symptom of my deteriorating mental state. But the feeling was one of an invasive, alien presence. The whispers felt ancient. They evoked a sense of profound, instinctual dread. The kind our ancestors must have felt hearing a predator in the long grass just beyond the firelight. Desperate. For a distraction, for something to anchor my spiraling thoughts. I turned my attention to my predecessor, Dr. Albrecht. His logs were professional, sterile, and maddeningly unhelpful. Daily entries of sensor readings, weather patterns, system checks, but his contract had ended abruptly in early August. There had to be a reason. I spent a week digging into the station's mainframe, looking for anything he might have left behind. Finally, I found it. a corrupted, password-protected partition on a backup server. It took me another 3 days to crack the encryption. What I found inside was not a log. It was a confession. A testament. Albrecht's private entries started much like my own log had, with the detection of the Murmur. He too had first assumed it was an equipment fault. Then, he became obsessed. He filled pages with complex equations, trying to find a natural geological explanation for the pulse. He found none. His entries grew more erratic, wrote about the same auditory hallucinations, the same whispers in the static. But he had gone further than I had, using a series of hydrophones on the drones. He'd managed to isolate and filter the sound. It is not a language of tongue and teeth, he wrote, his text growing larger, more frantic. It is a language of pressure and resonance, a geologic tongue. It speaks in the shifting of strata and the groan of stressed rock, and it is aware. Final entries were terrifying. Albrecht had become convinced that the Murmur was not seismic, but biological. The pulse, he wrote, 27 minutes. I have cross-referenced it with the deep Earth magnetic field fluctuations. They are in sync. It is not a heartbeat. A creature of this scale would not have a heart. It is a respiratory cycle, the slow, steady exhalation of a life form so vast, its single breath takes nearly half an hour. We are not on a planet. We are on a shell, an egg, and the thing inside has been sleeping. His last entry was a single, corrupted audio file. I clicked on it, my hand trembling. For a moment, there was only static. And then, through the hiss, a sound emerged. It was the Murmur, but amplified, filtered into the audible spectrum. It was a deep, guttural, impossibly vast groaning sound, like a glacier calving, but with a terrifying organic texture. When woven into it, clear as a bell, were the whispers. They were layered, chittering, sibilant voices, speaking in a chorus. That was both harmonious and deeply fundamentally wrong. Listening to it felt like blasphemy. It felt like I was eavesdropping on the private thoughts of a god I was never meant to know existed. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. Albrecht hadn't just left. He had fled. He had heard this, understood what it meant, and ran. My world had been tilted on its axis. Every creak of the outpost, every shudder from the ice, every pulse from the deep, now held a terrifying new significance. I wasn't a geologist monitoring a cave. I was a mite on the skin of a titan, a flea listening to the slow, dreaming breath of a leviathan that had slumbered for eons beneath the ice. The company, Arctos, Geoexploration, they knew. This is within expected parameters. They weren't exploring. They were listening. They had sent us here, one after another, to be its ear. The final descent began in the first week of December. A massive ice storm, a meteorological beast of biblical proportions, descended on Svalbard. The wind shrieked like a banshee, throwing sheets of ice against the armored windows. The satellite link went dead. I was completely, utterly cut off, trapped, and as the storm reached its crescendo, the Murmur changed. The slow 27-minute pulse began to accelerate, first to 20 minutes, then 15. The vibration intensified, no longer a subtle hum in my bones, but a violent, shuddering tremor that rattled the entire station. Mugs fell from shelves, and hairline fractures appeared in the lab's concrete floor. The air pressure fluctuated wildly, making my ears pop and my head spin. The maw, which had always been silent, began to groan. A deep, resonant sound echoed. Up from its depths, the sound of unimaginable weights shifting. A foul stench, the ancient metallic smell I had noticed on my first day, now billowed up from the shaft, thick and suffocating. I scrambled to the winch room, my hands shaking too much to properly operate the controls. On the main monitor, the drone I had left dangling a kilometer down was screaming data. Seismic readings were off the charts. Atmospheric sensors were detecting exotic gases, methane, sulfur compounds, things that had no business being in this part of the Earth's crust, and the whispers. They were no longer confined to the static of my headphones. They were in the room with me. They were in the air, in the vibrating steel walls, in my own skull. They were no longer a jumble of hissing syllables. They were forming words. Single, repeating phrase, spoken in a chorus of 1,000 ghostly voices. The sleep is broken. Panic, cold, and absolute seized me. I had to get out. I didn't care about the storm. I would rather freeze to death in the screaming wind than be here when that thing finally drew its first waking breath. I struggled into my extreme weather gear, my movements clumsy, my mind a vortex of pure terror. As I reached for the door, the entire station lurched violently to one side. The sound was not a sound. It was a physical blow, a concussive force that threw me from my feet. It was the sound of 1,000 mountains breaking at once, a tectonic plate shattering. It came from directly below. The armored glass window overlooking the maw cracked, spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. I crawled towards it, compelled by a morbid, suicidal curiosity. I had to see. The darkness within the maw was no longer absolute. Faint, sickeningly blue light was pulsing from its depths, in time with the accelerating rhythm of the tremors. The light was not electric. It was organic. A cold, phosphorescent bioluminescence, illuminating something vast and moving in the abyss. I couldn't make out a shape. The scale was too immense, the darkness too profound. What I saw were impressions, the curve of something colossal, a surface that was not rock, but something textured, like ancient hide or chitin. I saw structures that could have been mountains, but moved with a terrifying rhythmic purpose. It was like looking down the throat of a living creature the size of a continent. The whispers in my head coalesced into a single, deafening roar. It was a voice that was not a voice, a thought that was not my own, an awareness that flooded my consciousness with its sheer alien immensity. It knew I was there. It had known all along. My presence, my drones, my persistent listening. I hadn't been an observer. I had been an irritant. A grain of sand in a sleeping eye. I had been its alarm clock. The station groaned. The sound of tortured metal screaming its last protest. The crack in the window widened, and a jet of foul, super-chilled air blasted into the room. The blue light from below intensified, pulsing faster, brighter. This is my last entry. I am transmitting this on a broad-spectrum emergency frequency. I don't know if the storm will even let it out of the atmosphere. If you are hearing this, do not come looking for me. Do not send another team. Seal this place. Bury it under a mountain of concrete and forget it ever existed. The ground is breaking. The ice is shattering. The maw is widening. It is not a cave. It's a mouth. And after eons of slumber, it is finally beginning to open. The light is